Good morning. We're glad that you're here. Before we jump in, I want to tell you just real quick about something we're doing a couple weeks from today. One of our favorite things we do every year is our men's retreat at Dale Hollow. We've not been able to do that the last couple years because of the situation. So we're having a sort of a condensed version. It's just going to be one night only. We're going to have dinner together on May the 16th. Now, there is a golf component to this. If you like to play golf, David and Austin will have more details on that. But there's a sign-up sheet in your bulletin. There's just a form you can fill out. Just let us know how many are coming. Sonny's Barbecue is going to be catering the meal, and it won't take the place of the buffet, at Dale Hollow, or the trash talking that usually takes place down there. But it'll be a good night. We've got Jackson Massengale, who's a friend of ours, going to come and share some music, and then Koger Ramsey, who's been the preacher at New Charity Baptist Church here in Wayne County for 50 years, is going to come and share with us. We call him the Pope of Wayne County. Every time I think about him being there 50 years, I think, I'll never make it. You know what I mean? I just go week to week. But he's been in the same church for 50 years. And I promise you, if you come, you'll not be disappointed. And I hope that you'll sign up and be here on May the 16th. And I think the meal's at 6 or 6:30, just whatever it says there is fine. Also, today has been a very special day already. We had a great first service, and this was the first time in well over a year that our oldest member, Louise Bell, was here this morning. She's 90-something. I went to her 90th birthday party a few years ago, and she was in the hospital for several weeks before the virus started. So she's not been here in a long time, and she commented in the first service how much older everybody looked. And I don't know what she meant by that, but she did not look older. She looked great. Now, I bring that up to say this. A few minutes ago, our youngest member came in, just behind you. Some of you may not notice during the first song. We have these babies that are born, and we always put this rose over here to signify. And a couple weeks ago, there was a rose signifying that Mickey and Presley Sutton had their baby, Avett Boone. Did I get that right? Avett Boone, 2 weeks old. And he's here today in the balcony. So don't everybody rush up there. But I'll tell you right now, he's the coolest cat in here. So if you see them, make sure you thank them and welcome them. Now, I want to ask you a question. This may be a weird one, but I want you to think about it. What have you been doing the last 14 months? It was about 14 months ago, give or take, that the world that you and I live in changed pretty dramatically almost overnight. The schools were shut down. Many stores had limited capacity, and we were told to stay at home as much as possible in an effort to flatten the curve. Now, thankfully, we're coming out of some of that, but we also know that the world has been different for the last 14 months, and it's very likely, in fact, it's probable that you probably spent more time at home over the last 14 months than you have in any other period during your life. So I want to ask you to think about it. What did you do during that time? According to researchers, a lot of people spent that time working on new recipes. That's why we were home more, so we cooked more, we ate more. That's why a lot of people are dealing with what they're now called the Quarantine 15. If you have questions about that, I'll be glad to explain it to you when church is over. Other people spent that time trying out new hairstyles because the barber shops were all closed. 10 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to see pictures of this time period. We're going to think, what in the world was I doing? Because we're going to forget that all the barber shops were closed. Some overachievers used that time to discover new hobbies. Some people started gardening. Other people started playing golf. Maybe you started painting or online chess or whatever it is. The whole segment of people, and hopefully you're not in this, but the whole segment of people that spent the entire time binge watching new shows on Netflix. And that may have led to the Quarantine 15. Then, of course, if you went to any of the home improvement stores, a lot of people use this time to tackle new projects. There was a bedroom that needed painting, a bathroom that needed to be redone, maybe a living room that needed a makeover. And so they invested their time and their energy in sort of working through their list at home. But however you chose to spend the last 14 months, there's one thing that all of us have in common. It says, over the last 14 months, all of us have encountered some new challenges. There's some things that we've been struggling with, some things that we've had to deal with that we probably never saw coming. Researchers are now telling us that many of the after effects of what we've been through are not just physical, but they're even more psychological and emotional. And one of the areas where a lot of damage has been done is in the area of our relationships. Now, some of that is just by virtue of being forced to spend so much time together. You've heard the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And the opposite of that is that close proximity can make the heart grow harder. And some of you have experienced that. Then to make matters worse, for a period of time, you had the added pressure of trying to work from home. And if you have kids at home, you're trying to oversee virtual school. And it was the perfect storm. And let's be honest, there were and still are a lot of disagreements about the virus and the response to the virus. I read in the New York Times just this week that 20% of people admit to unfriending a member of their own family on social media over disagreements about COVID-19. Now, that's sad when it happens on social media. It's tragic when it happens in real life. And the sad reality is that a lot of people, hopefully not all of us, but some of us have spent the last 14 months fighting with the people closest to us. And the sad reality is, in a cruel twist of irony, that many of us have let a temporary cultural moment inflict permanent damage on some of our closest relationships. That's why we thought it would be a good idea for all of us to experience a family fix-up. So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 7. And for the next few weeks, really the month of May, every weekend we're going to look at one passage of Scripture and just look at something either Jesus said or something that he modeled in terms of how we're to relate to one another. And while you're turning there in your phone or your Bible, whichever you're using, I want to give you two quick disclaimers just to keep in mind as we work our way through this series. Number one is this. I'm not an expert on any of this. Just keep that in mind. I'm a fellow struggler, so we're going to spend our time focused on what Jesus said and not what I think, because what I think might be wrong, but what he said will certainly be right. The second thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different family situations. I look around the first service, I look around this service, there's all sorts of different situations. Some people are widowed, some people are divorced, some people are recently divorced, some people have kids, some people don't have kids, some people's kids have moved on, some people's kids are young. So whatever your situation is, it's possible that you might think, well, this doesn't really apply to me because my family situation doesn't look like everybody else's. Well, don't worry about that. The principles that we're going to talk about can be applied to any relationship. Friendships, extended family, work relationships. Our primary application will be in the area of family, but you just take the principles and apply them to your situation, and I think it will be helpful. That's why we want to challenge you to be here every weekend in the month of May. And we think this is that important. As we kick this off, we're going to talk about the one thing that has broken more relationships, torn apart more friendships, ruined more marriages, driven a wedge in between more parents and their children and vice versa, and poisoned the atmosphere inside of more homes than anything else we're going to talk about. And that's the habit that some of us have of relentlessly criticizing the people closest to us. Bob Russell compared the act of criticism, to what happens when termites invade your home. At first, the damage is slow, it's almost imperceptible, but if it goes on long enough, it begins to tear away at the frame of your house until one day the walls start to fall in and you didn't even realize it was happening. Matthew chapter 7, what you find is part of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And as we jump into this, I want you to just admit yourself, some of you have experienced this, some of you have been guilty of so we're all in the same boat. But Matthew's describing, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is describing a better way to live than what many of us have experienced. And as soon as I read this, you're going to recognize it because everybody's heard this. This is probably the most famous verse in our world today, but they're also probably the most misunderstood verses. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Here's what Jesus says. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. Now, as I said, these are some of the most quoted verses in our culture, but they're also some of the most misquoted. So let me show you on the screen how these verses sort of get shortened and summarized by most people. They say, do not judge, period. And that's kind of the way most people like to leave it. And their application then is, hey, if you're a follower of Jesus, you can't judge anybody or anything. You can never say that somebody's wrong. You can never say that certain activities are wrong because we're not to judge. And so they say that when Jesus said, do not judge, he puts a period at the end of it, and you're never to pass any sort of judgment. And to be honest, there's something about that that sort of appeals to some of us because we think that we'd like to live in a world without judgment. I mean, who wouldn't want to live in a world where you could just do whatever you wanted and nobody could say that anything's right and anything's wrong because we're all just supposed to figure it out ourselves? Man, we all think that we want that. In fact, that's the world that some people in our world are trying to create. It's a world where anything goes and nothing's right and nothing's wrong. That's why in survey after survey that comes out, the most often quoted verse in our culture is not John 3:16, it's Matthew 7:1, only they misquote it and they say, do not judge, and they put a period at the end of it. But that's not at all what Jesus actually said. If you go back and you look at it again, you'll notice he doesn't say do not judge, period. He says do not judge, comma. And then he follows it up with this warning. He says, however you choose to judge the people around you, that's the same way that you're eventually going to be judged. The Greek word that Matthew uses for judge is the word krino. Now, you had this experience. Sometimes you get out a dictionary and you look it up, and there's 3 or 4 possible meanings for the same word. Linguists call that a word's lexical range. Depending on the context, different words can be used in different ways. If you look at the screen, you can see there is a wide spectrum of uses for this one word that gets translated as judge. On one end of the spectrum, to judge, to krino somebody, means to condemn or attack them. That's what the Pharisees did in the New Testament. You look around, that's what they specialized in. They were always on the attack. They were always looking for somebody to condemn. To be honest, that's what a lot of church people do too. That's what some churches are known for. We're always on the attack. We're always looking for somebody to criticize. We're looking for something to condemn. The other end of the spectrum and the opposite end of the spectrum means to judge somebody, to krino somebody, means to analyze or evaluate. And there are several places in the New Testament where Jesus himself does that, and then he tells us to do the same thing. For example, you get down to verse 6 of Matthew chapter 7. He says this, do not give dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now here's the question. How do you know who qualifies as a dog and a pig if you're not allowed to make any evaluations? The answer is you don't. At some point, you have to make some sort of judgment. Over in John chapter 7, Jesus is in a debate with the religious leaders, and he says this, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Now, judge correctly is a lot different from do not judge, period. When Jesus said the words, do not judge, he was not handing down an absolute prohibition against careful evaluation. So, for example, if you're a parent, he wasn't saying it's wrong for you to decide who your kids get to hang out with on the weekends. If you're a person who has a position of responsibility, he wasn't saying that it's wrong for you to decide who gets promoted and who gets let go. I mean, there's some situations where you have to make some judgments, but what he is prohibiting are these reckless condemnations and these uninformed evaluations that we sometimes like to pass on to other people. And as followers of Jesus, it's true that we sometimes have to make some judgments about what's right and what's wrong, but we're to be careful when we do that, and we're also never to condemn the people around us as if we were their ultimate judge, because we're not. Now, how does this apply to the whole area of criticism? You may have never thought about this, but anytime you criticize someone, you're passing judgment on that person. Maybe it's something they did that you thought they shouldn't have done, or maybe it's something they didn't do that you thought that they should have done, but whatever it was that prompted it, there's something that caused you to draw some conclusions about that person that you felt like you needed to pass on, in the form of criticism. So with that in mind, I want to read again what Jesus says in verse 2 of this passage, because after he follows up this principle, he gives us a warning that should stop all of us in our tracks. Here's what he says. For in the same way that you judge or evaluate or analyze others, you too will be evaluated. You too will be judged. For with the measure that you use, it'll be measured to you. Now, according to the ancient rabbis, God the Father has two measures or two filters that he uses when he deals with people. And this would have been something that the people listening to Jesus teach that day as he delivered the Sermon on the Mount would have been intimately familiar with. This is something they had heard all their lives. The first measure or the first filter is what's called the justice filter. This is where God looks at your situation and he gives you exactly what you deserve. The other filter, the other measure, and the one that we all hope he's using when he looks at us is the mercy filter. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. In Hebrew, the word mercy means God's favorable disposition towards us. That means when God looks at us, he is not out to get us. He's out to show his kindness and demonstrate his love to us. That means that God is not looking for reasons to come down on you. He's looking for ways he can express his kindness towards you. And so Jesus says, hey, whatever filter you choose to use, that's the same filter God's going to use when he looks at you. So the question is, when God looks at you, would you rather he give you what you deserve, or would you rather he express his kindness to you? What about you? But for me, that's a pretty easy question. Let me give you the principle we want you to hold on to this weekend. Here it is. If you want your relationships to flourish, if you want your relationships to be everything that they could be, then you need to celebrate freely and criticize sparingly. Let me say that again. Just make sure you got it. You need to celebrate freely and criticize sparingly. Have you ever known somebody who sort of took on the role of chief critic everywhere they went? I mean, just keep your eyes on me, right? If they're here, like, don't look at them. But you know what I'm saying. And to be honest, I mean, this is the opposite of what most of us do. Most of us criticize freely and celebrate sparingly. But if we want the relationships to be all they could be, we've got to reverse that. But some people have a hard time with that. And you know what I'm talking about. They go to a restaurant, man, and from the moment they sit down till the moment they get back in the car, it's just one complaint after another. The service is too slow. The food's overpriced. The lights are too low. Some people go to a ball game. They do the same thing, man. The coach is an idiot. The umpire's blind. The kids don't play hard. Thankfully, we don't deal with this much here, but some people, they carry that same attitude with them to a church service. So they sit through a worship service, and when it's over, they go back to their car, and rather than thinking about their relationship with the Lord, what are they doing? They're thinking about everything they didn't like. Music was too loud. Sermon was too long. And did you see what the worship team was wearing? I mean, you know how it goes. No offense to you guys, but you know how it goes. Some people have convinced themselves that their spiritual gift is correcting everybody else. They have the spiritual gift of criticism. And so from daylight till dark, they spend all day looking for people to criticize. Now, here's the problem with that. It's one thing if you want to criticize the people that you only read about in the newspaper or the people that you're only ever going to see on a screen. But the problem comes in when you carry that same attitude in and you start treating the people you're closest to like you treat the people you're never going to meet. And if that goes on long enough, you know what happens? It's like those termites that eat away at the frame of your house. Eventually everything starts to collapse unless there's an intervention. So let me give you something really profound that I want you to write down, okay? This is going to blow you away, but some of you need to hear this. Nobody wants to be around somebody that always criticizes them. Let me say it again so you make sure you got it. Nobody wants to be around somebody that only criticizes them. And if you're a person who's always on the attack, if you're a person who's always trying to correct the people around you, if you're a person who's always condemning the people around you, don't be surprised if at some point the invitations to hang out start to dry up. And don't be surprised if at some point your kids stop coming around and hanging out with you. You think back through your life, you've never heard anybody say, you know what I think we should do this weekend? I think we should go see Dad so he can tell us once again how disappointed he is in us. You've never heard anybody say that. You've never had anybody say to you, you know what I think we should do? I think we should invite Mom over to the house for dinner so she can tell us everything we're doing wrong. We haven't done that in a while. That sounds like that'd be a fun way to spend. Nobody wants to be around somebody that only criticizes them. On the other hand, all of us are naturally drawn to people who celebrate freely. We all want to be around people who look for what's right rather than what's wrong. We all want to be around people who build us up rather than tear us down. So if you want to be a person that other people are naturally drawn to, if you want to be a person who your kids want to come hang out with you and the people want to hang out with you, then you need to learn to celebrate freely and criticize sparingly. Now keep in mind, that doesn't mean that you never have to pass judgment. It doesn't mean you never have to speak up and offer constructive criticism, but it does mean that before you do it, you have to make sure your heart is in the right place. Now you get to verse 3, Jesus does something really incredible. Jesus was a whole lot of things, but one of the things he was great at, he was a brilliant teacher. So you get to verse 3, and he gives us this parable that sort of follows up on what he's just said, just to make sure that we don't miss this point. Look at how he does this. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, if you find yourself in a position, and occasionally you will, where you have to make some sort of judgment, there are 3 words that should characterize how you do this. Rather than just, unloading on everybody and doing what we normally do, take a deep breath, look in the mirror, relax for a moment, and then if you have to go forward, you have to do it in these 3 ways. Here's the first word. You have to do it humbly. You have to do it humbly. I told you earlier, these verses are often misquoted, and when you get to verse 3, they're especially misunderstood. You get to verse 3, Jesus, he contrasts what he calls a plank. Your translation might say a log or a beam. We think of it like a 2x4, something that you would build with. And a speck of sawdust. Now, I couldn't come up with any sawdust, but I've got just a little bit of a flower stem just so you can see it. So what we think about, he's talking about these planks, and these are the big sins, and these little specks. I mean, these are what we would call the small sins, right? So this is when you tell a white lie. Maybe you fudge your expense account for a few dollars. Maybe you watch something, borderline you shouldn't have watched. You break the speed limit by a few miles an hour. And we think, well, that's really no big deal. These are just the specks. But over here now, these are the felonies, right? These are the misdemeanors, but these are the felonies. This is when you really do something. You hurt somebody, you steal something, you find yourself in a situation in which you get arrested and you've really messed up. And we think that what Jesus is doing here is he's contrasting the big sins with the little sins. And he's focused on the size of the sin. And so we get this image when we read this of somebody walking around and they got all these felonies in their eye. And they're going around, they're using their other eye to examine everybody else that's just got this. And it's kind of an absurd image when you think about it. But I really don't think that's what Jesus was doing. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever gotten something in your eye? I know you have. I mean, maybe it was something big, maybe it was something small, but here's the deal. When you get something in your eye, it doesn't have to be big. I mean, it can be really small. It can be part of a flower stem. It can be an eyelash. It can be a speck of sawdust, like Jesus said. And what happens is your eye starts to water, starts to get red. The irritation starts to build up. Your vision gets distorted. The pain starts intensifying. It's really uncomfortable. Whatever it is that's in your eye, it can be something you can hardly see. But if it's in your eye, it feels like this. So it doesn't matter if it's a speck or a plank or whatever. If it's in your eye, it feels like this. And it gets so uncomfortable, you can't think about anything else until you to remove that thing from your eye. So here's what I think Jesus is doing. I think he's telling us that before we go out and criticize other people who we think have more of these when we've got these, that's not the point. He's saying, hey, before you go out and criticize anybody else, before you go out and talk to somebody else, you look in the mirror and you recognize your own faults. And you deal with your junk before you worry about dealing with everybody else's junk. And what Jesus is saying, hey, it's essential for you to deal with your stuff before you start dealing with everybody else's stuff. It's important for you to do a little self-evaluation before you evaluate the people around you. But the reason we don't do that, and you know this, the reason we don't do that is because it's a lot more fun to evaluate everybody else than it is to evaluate ourselves. The great preacher John Stott put it like this. He said, we have a rosy view of ourselves and a jaundiced view of others. Indeed, what we are often doing is seeing our own fault in others and judging them vicariously. That way, we experience the pleasure of self-righteousness without the pain of repentance. So to avoid that mistake, I've got to make sure that long before I criticize anybody else, that I take some time to look into the mirror of my own heart and see all the junk that's there. And start dealing with that so that when I go talk to somebody else, I'm not coming with a, I'm holier than you are and I'm more righteous than you are attitude. Instead, I'm coming along beside it and I'm saying, look, I want you to know you've got some junk, I've got some junk, and together maybe we can help each other avoid some mistakes. Totally different approach than what most people do. The second word that describes how you should do this is the word lovingly. You look close at this passage, there's a word that Jesus uses 3 times. That's the word brother. He's talking about your relationship with somebody that you're already close to. So what Jesus is describing here is not, going on social media and relentlessly criticizing everybody you disagree with over whatever topic it is that week, right? He's not talking about going to the ball game and, taking shots at the coach that you think is giving your kid a raw deal, or getting together with your friends and, criticizing your boss who you think's unfair. It's not that. He's talking about you going to somebody that you're already close to, somebody that you have a relationship, maybe somebody that lives in your house, if not somebody that you've known for a long time. Somebody that you've got this built-in relationship with, and you help them see the truth of their situation, and then you help them experience the freedom that comes when that speck or that plank or whatever it is removed. You don't do it to destroy them. You do it to restore them. You don't do it because it's going to make you feel better about yourself. You do it to help them get better. So he's talking about when you go to that adult son or daughter of yours and you say, hey, I see what's happening here. And I just want you to know I've been where you are. And I think if you'll listen, I can help you avoid some mistakes. It's when you go to that person that you've known for a long time and say, look, I know you've really messed this up. And I'm not here to beat you up, but I'm here to help you. And if you'll let me, we'll walk through this together. That's a lot different than the way most people approach this. You don't do it because you have to. You don't do it certainly because you enjoy it. You do it because you love that other person and you want what's best for them. Now, there's one more word that's critical to this. It's the word gently. Galatians 6:1, the Apostle Paul wrote these words, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. If you had to ask the people that you're close to, the people that maybe live in your house, people you've known a long time, so I want you to use one word, choose one word to describe how you think I offer correction. What word would they choose? How about this? If you had to ask most people that have no church experience, or maybe even a lot of church experience, you say, how do you think the church comes across in the way we try to correct people? What word do you think they'd choose? Would it be words like condescending, mean-spirited, arrogant, prideful? Or would they say, you know what? You've always been pretty gentle. I have a picture that I want to show you. According to optometrists, the eye is the most sensitive square inch of the human body. The optic nerve has 1.7 million nerve fibers that carry messages from your eyes back to your brain. And so because of that, the eye itself is 600 more times sensitive, 600 times more sensitive than any other square inch of your body, than normal skin. That's why if you look at a bright light, your eyes inevitably start to squint. If you're outside and it's dusty and there's a lot of stuff in the air and it's blowing around, your eyes will squint. It's just this involuntary reaction. You can't control it, but your body is going to do whatever it can to protect your eyes because of that enhanced sensitivity. So I got these three sons at home, two of which are knuckleheads, but I'll let you guess. But the oldest one, Cannon, is 5 years old now, and he's got these really long eyelashes, like almost abnormally long for a boy his age. I mean, he doesn't look weird or anything, but I mean, if you see him, some people were looking after the first service, you'll kind of see abnormally long. And what will happen is every once in a while, maybe once or twice a month, he'll be sitting on the couch or we'll be out doing something and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, I mean, out of nowhere, he'll start to panic. And you can see it. I mean, he'll start to sort of tense up and his face gets red and he takes his hands and he shoves his hands. He starts pushing on his eyes. He'll say, Daddy, 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 I've got an eyelash in my eye. I've got an eyelash. You've got to get it, get it, get it, get it. And he just goes crazy. So he runs over, and here's what I've noticed. When he runs over and he's in that condition, he's panicking. If I grab him by the arm really roughly, and I take my fingers and I grab his eyelid and I start to pull that thing up and I stick my finger in his eye, do you know what he does? He hollers for his mom. And then he backs away. Because when you've got something in your eye, you're not looking for somebody to come in and grab you and pull that thing out. When you've got something in your eye, you're looking for somebody to take you by the hand and get a warm towel and place it over your eye and maybe take you to the water faucet and just so gently just rinse that thing out. And the whole time they're doing it, they're talking soft to you. They're telling you how strong you are, how brave you are. And then it starts to come out. And then when it's over and the pain is gone, you're waiting for somebody to hug you and tell you how brave you were. Do you want your relationships to get better? Stop throwing so many punches. Start handing out some hugs. Stop looking for stuff to criticize and start looking for any reason at all to celebrate. Stop using your words to tear other people down and start using them to build people up. You get to verse 12 in this passage, and Jesus summarizes the whole thing. I mean, the whole Sermon on the Mount in one sentence. Here's what he says. So in everything you do to others what you would have them do to you. So in everything you talk to others like you would have them talk to you. So in everything you celebrate others like you want to be celebrated. And then he says, for this sums up the law and the prophets. You want to see your relationships improve. I mean, you want to see them flourish. You want to see them go from wherever they are to wherever you think they could be. Let me tell you what you can do. You go home today, and by tomorrow, things will be a little bit better. You go home today, and you just start treating the people you live with, the people that you're close to, like you want to be treated. And I promise you, by tomorrow, things will be a little bit better. Now, some of you hear that, and I know what you're thinking. There's a part of you that maybe objects to that. And you say, well, I understand what you're saying, man, but you don't know the people I live with. And there's a lot to criticize when I look at the people I live with. Well, keep in mind, that may be the same thing they said about you. But I want you to stand. I want to read you something. Go ahead and stand where you are. I want you to think about this. Do you know why we're supposed to treat others like we want to be treated rather than treating them how we think they deserve to be treated? It's because of what Jesus did for us. Jesus did not treat us like we deserve to be treated. In just a second, we're going to sing a song together, Christ is Risen. When we get to the first verse, I want you to pay attention. It goes like this. It says, let no one caught in sin remain inside the lie of inward shame. We fix our eyes upon the cross and run to him who showed great love and bled for us. Do you know why we're supposed to show love to the people around us? Because Jesus showed love to us, even when we didn't deserve it. And instead of coming down on us and instead of condemning us because we've fallen short, he instead made a way for us to have the specks and the planks removed. And some of you are here right now and you're thinking, I need 3 or 4 of these just sticking out of my head, right? And I've got these specks, and I've got the shame of these specks, and I've got the weight of these planks, and it's just bearing down on me, and it's ruining my relationships. And I want you to know, Jesus made a way for that to go away. 1 Peter says when he went to the cross, that he bore all of our sins, our past sins, our present sins, our future sins. And so you don't have to carry this stuff with you. You can leave it right here. When you get to the second verse, the song says, beneath the weight of all our sin, beneath the weight of all these planks, beneath the weight of all these specks, you bowed to none but heaven's will, talking about Jesus. No scheme of hell, no scoffer's crown, no burden great can hold you down. Now this stuff, it can hold you down, but it won't hold him down. So you can give it to him, and you can walk away from all that if you want to. So we're going to have a brief invitation. If you want to pray with somebody, we'll talk to somebody. David will be here. I'll be here. Just come. And we won't embarrass you. You don't have to say anything. It's nothing weird. We're just going to talk to you. And we'd love to help you get rid of some of that stuff. Let's see.